how you buy GPUs is like buying cocaine. You call up a couple people, you text a couple people, you ask, yo, how much you got? What's the price?
If your two arch nemesis suddenly team up, and it's the worst possible news you can have. I did not see this coming. I think it's an amazing development.
Like a Warren Buffett coming into a stock. Jensen is like the Buffett effect for the semiconductor world.
It's kind of poetic that everything's gone full circle and Intel's sort of crawling to NVIDIA.
Dylan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, yeah.
Just so happens that there's some big news just as we're having you. NVIDIA announcing $5 billion investment in Intel and them teaming up to jointly develop custom data centers and PC products. What do you think about the collaboration?
I think it's hilarious that like NVIDIA could invest, it gets announced, and their investment's already up 30%. $5 billion investment, $2 billion profit already, right? Like, I think it's fun because they need their customers to really have big buy-in. So when their potential customers buy in and commit to certain types of products, it makes a lot of sense, right? And it's kind of funny in a way because in the past, there was this whole like thing around how Intel was sued for being anti-competitive with their chipsets, and NVIDIA actually got like a settlement from Intel, right, way back when like the graphics were separate from the GPU, and the graphics were really put on the chipset, which had like all this other I/O, like USB and all this stuff. So it's kind of a funny like turn of events that now Intel is going to make like a chiplet and package it alongside a chiplet from NVIDIA, and then that's like a PC product, right? So, it's kind of poetic that everything's gone full circle and Intel's sort of crawling to NVIDIA, but actually it might just be the best like device, right? I don't want an ARM laptop because it can't do a lot of things. And so an x86 laptop with NVIDIA graphics fully integrated would be probably the best product in the market.
So are you optimistic? How do you think this will go?
I mean, sure. I mean, I hope, right? I'm a perpetual optimist on Intel because have to be. I was thinking that the structure of the deal that at least like a lot of the government folks and Intel were sort of trying to go for was people get, big customers and the biggest suppliers directly give capital to Intel. But this is sort of the other way around where they're buying some of the stock, having some ownership, but they're not really like diluting the other shareholders. And then the other shareholders will get diluted, / everyone will get diluted when Intel finally does raise the capital from the capital markets. But because they've announced these deals, and they're pretty small, right? $5 billion NVIDIA, $2 billion SoftBank, U.S. government was 10. These are still relatively small.
Pretty small, yeah.
Yeah, on the nature of things, right? I mean, like, last time I think I said Intel needs like $50 billion, right? Now when they go to the capital markets, it's better, and hopefully they get another couple of these announcements. Maybe there's all sorts of speculation that Trump is involved in sort of getting these companies to invest. NVIDIA, and now the government as well, of course. And now is Apple going to come invest, right? And also do something with Intel, or who else will come in? And that'll really boost investor confidence, and they can dilute / go get debt.
Like a Warren Buffett coming into a stock. The Jensen is like the Buffett effect for the semiconductor world. Guido, you were the CTO of the Intel data center and AI BU.
Yep.
What are your thoughts?
I think it's really good for customers and consumers in the short term, right? Having both Intel and like specifically the laptop market, right? Having the two collaborate is amazing. I wonder what's going to happen with any of the internal graphics or AI products at Intel, right? They might just push a reset and give up on that for now, right? They currently don't have anything competitive, right? There was the Gaudi effort that's more or less done, right? There was the internal graphics chips, which never competed really at the high end, right? So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's for both sides. Look, I think for Intel, they needed a breath of fresh air, right? They were sort of desperate. So I think it's a very good thing. I think AMD is fucked. I mean, if your two arch nemesis suddenly team up, and it's the worst possible news you can have, right? They were already struggling, right? Their cards are good, their software stack is not, right? They were getting very limited traction, right? They now have a bigger problem that side. I think ARM is a little bit screwed as well, right? Because their biggest selling point was sort of like, look, we can partner with everybody that doesn't want to partner with Intel. And that's sort of, in a sense, their number one like NVIDIA is probably the most dangerous of the future CPU competitors, right? And so they now suddenly have access to Intel technologies and might get in that direction. It remixes the card, right? It's I did not see this coming. I think it's an amazing development.
Yeah, will be very interesting to see this play out. To Eric's point, packed news week. The other thing that we wanted to pick your brain on, since we have you here, Dylan, is the other news dropping on Huawei unveiling their kind of AI roadmap. And, obviously they're hyping up the capabilities. I think you guys have been sort of ahead of the curve of trying to gauge, hey, what can the 950 supercluster actually do? But would love your thoughts on everything that's going on from the China front, right? And this is kind of coupled with DeepSeek saying their next models are going to be on domestically produced Chinese chips, the Chinese government kind of banning companies from buying the produced specifically for China NVIDIA chips. So there's just sort of a lot of dominoes falling right now in the semi market in China, but would love your take overall and drill into some detail.
Yeah, I think when you sort of zoom out to even let's walk from 2020, because I think it's really important to recognize how cracked Huawei is, or even just historically, they've always been really good. Sure, initially they stole Cisco source code and firmware and all this stuff, but then they rapidly passed them up as well as every other telecom company. In 2020, they released an Ascend chip and submitted to impartial public benchmarks. And they were the first to bring 7-nanometer AI chips to market. They were the first to have that, right? Now, you could still say NVIDIA was ahead, but the gap was like nothing, right? And this is when they could access the full foreign supply chain. This was when they just passed Apple to be TSMC's largest customer. They were, clearly ahead of everyone on a manufacturing supply chain sort of design standpoint. In a total basis, right? Now, of course, NVIDIA still had higher market share, but it was so nascent then, they could have really taken over the market. Huawei got banned by the Trump 1 administration from accessing, and then it went into effect in 2020, right? The full ban. And so they were only able to make a small volume of these chips, but they had trained significant models on these chips that they made then. And then over the next couple of years, right, NVIDIA continued to accelerate. Huawei, because they were banned from TSMC, had to go and try and figure out how to manufacture at SMIC, the domestic TSMC. And then they were also, in parallel, trying to go through shell companies to manufacture at TSMC and acquire memory from Korea and so on and so forth. So by the end of 24, this had gotten in full swing, and it was caught, right? It was caught, and they finally shut it down. But they were able to acquire 3 million chips, 2.9 million chips from TSMC through these other entities, right? Yeah. Roughly $500 million worth of orders, which ends up being $1 billion fine that the U.S. government gave TSMC, if I recall correctly. Or at least there was a Reuters article about it. I don't know if they actually issued it, which is important and interesting to gauge, because the number of Ascends floating out there has not consumed this entire capacity yet, right? So now we get to 2025, right? The H20 got banned in the beginning of the year. NVIDIA had to write off, huge amounts of money. Our revenue estimate for NVIDIA in China for just H20 was north of 20 billion, because that's what they were booking in capacity / had to write off. Yeah. And then it got banned. They cut the supply chain. They just said, no, we're not doing this anymore. They had their inventory, gets reapproved. They resell the inventory, but now they're like, do we even restart production? Is NVIDIA's question. And now you have China saying, hey, we don't need NVIDIA. We have domestic alternatives, right? Whether it be Huawei or Cambricon. Yeah. These companies have, capacity, but most of this capacity is still foreign produced, right? Whether it be wafers from TSMC, memory from Korea, right? Samsung and SK Hynix. So the question is sort of how much can they do domestically? And there's sort of two fronts there, right? There's the logic, i.e. replacing TSMC, and there's the memory, i.e. replacing Hynix, Samsung, Micron. And on the logic side, they're behind, but they're really ramping there, and I think they can sort of get to the production capacity estimates needed, and the U.S. is still allowing them to import all the equipment necessary pretty much. The bans are really for beyond the current generation of technology, beyond 7 nanometer. The bans are really for 5 nanometer and below. Even though the government says they're for 14 nanometer, the actual equipment that's banned is only for below 7 nanometer. And so they'll be able to make a lot of 7 nanometer AI chips and maybe even get to 5 with, using existing equipment for 5 nanometer rather than like taking the new techniques. And so like there's the logic side and then there's the memory side. And the aspect of Huawei's announcement that was surprising was that they're doing custom memory, right?
Yeah.
That's the part that is sort of like, hey, this is really exciting. They announced, 2 different types of chips for next year. One that's focused on recommendation systems and prefill, and then one that's focused on decode.
There's a trend these days.
Yeah. So in NVIDIA, the same thing. They just announced a prefill specific chip recently. There's numerous AI hardware startups that are really focusing on prefill versus decode. And so this sort of split of inference into 2 workloads, Huawei is doing the same thing for their next year chip. And what's interesting is the decode one has, custom HBM. What does that mean? What is the manufacturing supply chain? Because that's the one that's tricky, right? How much can they manufacture of that custom HBM? And NVIDIA and others are also adopting custom HBM only starting next year, right? So it's not like, yes, the manufacturing capacity is not there. Maybe it is going to consume a bit more power. It's going to be slightly lower bandwidth, but the fact that they're able to do, some of the same things that NVIDIA plans to do, AMD plans to do in their memory is evidence that they're catching up. But then, the main question that remains is production capacity. So as far as like, hey, NVIDIA is banned in China, right? Like they're saying don't buy NVIDIA chips. I think for a period of time, that's fine because fine for China, right? From a perspective of, hey, I'm China. That's fine because you have all this capacity that you shipped in 2024. They haven't turned into AI chips. Now you're turning them into AI chips. You're running all that stockpile down. What about the transition from running that stockpile down to ramping your new stuff, right? And that transition is the one that's really tricky. China's either shooting itself in the foot by not purchasing NVIDIA chips during that time period, or China's able to ramp. I think they'll be able to ramp. I think it'll take a little bit longer, and there will be like a sort of a gap in between where China probably backtracks and says it's fine. Like ByteDance and is like begging for NVIDIA chips, right? Like they don't want to use. They use some Cambricon, they use some Huawei, but they really want to use NVIDIA because it's way better. They don't care about like the domestic supply chain. They want to make the best models. They want to deploy their AI as efficiently as possible. And so this is like, the government can mandate them to like not do it, right? So it's not that NVIDIA is not competitive. It's that the government's sort of trying to instigate it. And then like, I guess the last sort of thing is like, there's always the argument of like, hey, if banning NVIDIA chips to China is so good for China, why didn't China do it for itself? And they're finally doing it for themselves. So it'll be interesting to see. Smuggling is still happening, right? Re-exportation of chips from other countries to China, that is still happening at some volume, low volume, lower medium volume, right? But then the direct shipments of NVIDIA chips that are legally allowed to China are not necessarily happening today, but may have to restart at some point because China won't have the production capacity to. They would just have so many fewer AI chips being deployed domestically versus the US. And at some point you kind of have to pick like, am I all about the internal supply chain or am I all about chasing, super powerful AI?
Yeah.
So is there an angle here about a negotiation angle as well? Because currently there's still discussions ongoing. What exactly are the boundaries? What can be exported to China? So these are sort of well-timed announcements if you want to make a point that U.S. should allow more exports. Do you think that's a factor or not?
Yeah. So I in the report we did a few weeks ago about the production capacity of Huawei and the supply chain, there was a bit in there that we wrote about how honestly, like if you are China and you want NVIDIA, you do want NVIDIA chips. Actually, how do you play this? Right.
Yeah.
And it's by by hyping up your domestic supply chain.
Yeah.
And it's like yes, we can do everything. It's Huawei announced the most crazy shit possible. Announced 7 years of fucking 3 years of roadmaps that are
so you sit there and read your report basically.
No. I think they knew. I mean, they were already banned, and then like say we're banning NVIDIA, right? Like, and then it's like then the government official is going to think alongside sort of like lobbying from domestic players like. Of course we want to ship them better AI chips. Like, we're losing this market. We can't lose this market. And it's sort of like, it is 10,000 IQ, right? And we're here playing checkers while they're playing chess.
Well, so I guess negotiating chip aside, in that report, you talked about HBM or high bandwidth memory being a bottleneck to Huawei. To your point on one of the surprising aspects of the announcement, do you think it's credible that it's no longer a bottleneck based on what they're saying, or is it just hype?
I think production capacity wise, it is still absolutely a bottleneck. They certain types of equipment required for making HBM need to be imported. They're working on domestic solutions, but as far as we know, they have not imported enough equipment for this. Although, if you look at Chinese import data for different types of equipment, right, there's sort of like fabs spend, roughly, it depends on the process technology, but fabs spend roughly different amounts of money on lithography, etch, deposition, metrology, right, like these different steps. And historically, lithography has hovered around, 17, 18%. With EUV, it grew to 25%, right? But China, because they sort of like wanted to stockpile lithography and they were worried about the coming ban, they were importing lithography at a much higher rate than that, right? Like 30, 40% of their equipment imports were lithography. And they were just stockpiling lithography equipment. This is sort of like reversed now in that, like, hey, if I want to, and so if you look at the monthly import-export data, both into provinces in China, but also out of countries, you can see that etch specifically is skyrocketing. And the main thing about, stacking HBM is that you have to, when you have each wafer, you have to create like this thing called a through silicon via, so it can connect from the top to bottom, and then you stack them on top of each other, right? 12 high, 16 high for HBM. That's how you make super high bandwidth memory. And their imports for etch is like skyrocketing now. So it's like, it's they don't have the production capacity yet. How fast can they ramp it is a function of how much equipment can they get, A, and B, like the yields, right? Improving yields is really hard on manufacturing. Intel and Samsung are really good, and TSMC is just amazing. Not that those companies suck, like I think is a better way to put it. And so, it's those two things. I think yield, they haven't even started production of high speed of HBM3. Right, they've only done some sampling of HBM2. HBM3 came out like a few years ago, so there's still quite a bit of ways on like going up the learning curve. I obviously expect them to catch up faster than it took the technology to be developed, because it exists, right? In the world, we know how to do it. It's just a matter of actually doing it versus inventing it. And then the other one is sort of the production capacity. A couple months of import-export data is not enough to set up for years worth of supply chain buildup. Right, which is what we have today in Korea for the Korean companies. Now Hynix is also investing in the U.S., in Illinois, and then Micron's primarily in Japan. The American memory companies primarily in Japan and Taiwan, but they're also expanding in Singapore and the U.S. now. Like, there's so much capital that's been invested. It would take some time for China to build up that production capacity to actually match the West. And when I say the West, I mean East Asia. In production, non-China East Asia in production capacity. So it'll take some time to get there. And I think it's like, hey, we can design this. It's always a question of, can we manufacture? And then the thing like that Jensen would say is like, you're betting on China not being able to manufacture. Like,
right.
It's a matter of when, not if. And that's the whole calculus that, like, I think the U.S. government has to be aware of when they're like, hey, what level of AI chips do we sell? Do we sell everything? Probably not, because AI is far more powerful, and the end market of AI is going to be way larger than the end market of semiconductors and equipment. Do we sell, what level do we sell at? Well, how much can China make at each specific, sort of performance tier, and then, analyze that, and what's the volume, and then figure out like what is okay, which is like maybe a little bit above or around the same level.
Yeah. So if you, to your point on like playing chess versus checkers, if you're Jensen, what would your next move be, given the situation at hand?
It's both like partially true that he's afraid of Huawei more than he is like an AMD.
Right. He called them formidable.
Yeah. Well, like, I mean, like every other, like Huawei's beat Apple, right? They passed Apple up in TSMC orders. They passed Apple up in phone market share. Not in the US, but like in many parts of the world. Before the bans came down. And then even now they're growing back again in market share without like Western supply chains. They've done this to numerous other industries. I would say Apple's like a formidable competitor, right? Like they've beaten a lot of industries. And so it's reasonable that he's afraid of them. it's sort of, and he's not afraid of A and B. So like I think like the best thing is like try and sow as much like what Huawei announced is reality rather than like their hope target.
Yeah.
And sow away all doubt on manufacturing capacity, which I think is not fair, right? Like I think manufacturing capacity is a real bottleneck for them. And then the yield learnings, real bottleneck, like temporary, maybe. We'll see how long, and we'll see how fast the rest of the NVIDIA technology advances past what Huawei is capable of, right? And how fast Huawei is able to close the gap. But I think his main sort of pitch would be Huawei is real. They're a formidable competitor. They're going to take over not just the Chinese market, but also foreign markets, right? Whether it be the Middle East or Southeast Asia or South Asia or Europe or LATAM, right? Everywhere besides America. And the sort of there's a I think Noah Smith has this analogy, right? His whole idea is that you should Galapagos China, right? Make them have their own domestic industry that is so different from the rest of the world, right? Kind of what happened with Japan in the 70s and 80s. And 90s, their PCs were so specific and hyper optimized to the Japanese market with like, the weird, like, I don't know if you've seen the weird scroll wheel on these Japanese PCs. Like you literally, like, it's like you go like this and it scrolls, right? And it's like, and then the touchpad is a circle and then that's around it. It's like things like that are so weird.
Totally.
And the rest of the world doesn't care, but Japan market likes it, right? And his whole idea is like, let's Galapagos them, i.e. keep their technology within China, and then that's like dead weight loss and they never expand outside, versus we serve the whole world. But the whole risk is that the opposite can also happen, right? Our technology is hyper optimized to running, language models at this scale and RL, and you keep like hardware, software, co-design can take you down a path of the tree that like is a dead end. And then China, like, because they're not allowed to access this tree, they're like, oh, okay. And then they end up in the like optimal spot, right? We hit a local minima, they had a local maxima, they had a global maxima, right? Like that's sort of like technological Galapagosing is sort of what Noah Smith's analogy is. I like it a lot. I don't know if it's accurate, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I love that. Well, actually, maybe just taking a step back from current events, even though there's so much to talk about right now. Last time you appeared with us, NVIDIA came up, obviously, and you talked about a couple of the potential paths forward for NVIDIA.
Give us maybe the bull case, the bear case.
Yeah, fair enough.
There's a lot embedded in their numbers now, but what's interesting is consensus for the banks is like for across like the hyperscalers, so Microsoft, CoreWeave, Amazon, Google, and Oracle. Right? Meta, right? So it's the 6 hyperscalers, right? Who I would consider hyperscalers. The consensus for the banks is $360 billion of spend next year across all of them. And my number is closer to it's like 450, 500. And that's based on like, all the research we do on like data centers and like tracking each individual data center in the supply chains, right? So
this is just NVIDIA spend.
This is CapEx for the hyperscalers, right? And then that CapEx gets split up across different companies, but the vast majority still goes to NVIDIA, right? And NVIDIA is in a position not where they can't take share, right? They grow with the market / defend share. Yeah. And so the question is like, how fast is the growth rate of CapEx for hyperscalers and other users, right? And the reason I included Oracle and CoreWeave as hyperscalers, even though they're traditionally not called hyperscalers, is because they are OpenAI's hyperscaler, right?
Right.
So, when you look at the Oracle announcement, right? Like, first of all, the Oracle announcement, I don't understand why people don't think this is crazier. They did the most unprecedented thing in the history of like stocks and public and companies ever. They gave a 4-year guidance. And it made Larry the richest man in the world, like all these things.
Yeah.
Right? Like, anyways, the question is like, how fast does revenue grow, right? Do you think Oracle and do you think OpenAI, which signed a $300 billion plus deal with Oracle, will actually be able to pay $300 billion, right? Across raising capital and revenue. And I think and it gets to a rate of like over $90 billion a year in just a handful of years, right? So it's like, do you believe the market will grow that fast? It's very possible, yes. And it's very possible for like, OpenAI, what is their revenue going to be exiting next year? Some people think 35 billion, some people think 40 billion, some people think 45 billion, ARR by the end of the year next year. This year they hit 20, right? ARR, so if that growth rate is maintained, then all of that cost goes to compute plus all the capital they continue to raise, right? And again, their financials that they sort of like gave to investors for their last round was like, hey, we're gonna burn like $15 billion next year. It's probably more likely going to be like 20, but like, and you stack this on, and they're not turning a cash flow. They're not going to be profitable until 2029. So you sort of have like, they're going to continue to burn 15, 20, $25 billion of cash each year, plus revenue growth. That's their compute spend. And you do this for Anthropic, you do this for OpenAI, you do this for all the labs. It's very possible that the pie does get to, more than 500, not 360 billion next year, 500 billion next year, and for total capex, and the pie continues to grow for hyperscalers. NVIDIA says actually it's going to be multiple trillions a year on AI infrastructure, and he's going to capture a huge portion of it. That's his bull case, right? That's the bull case is AI is actually so transformative, and the world just gets covered in data centers, and the majority of your interactions are with AI, whether it's like, business productivity and telling an agent to do some code, or you're just talking to your AI girlfriend, Annie, right? Like, it doesn't matter. All of this is running on NVIDIA for the most part. The bear case is, even if it does grow a lot.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Save the bull case for a second. I think fundamentally the value creation, I think, personally, is there, right? I mean, to create trillions of dollars of value with AI, I can totally see this happen. So assume it's true. Where will NVIDIA top out?
I guess, how much do you believe in takeoffs, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like if there is like a takeoff scenario, right, where like powerful AI builds more powerful AI builds more powerful AI, or that creates more and more, each level of intelligence like enables more for the economy, right? Like how many monkeys can you employ in your business versus how many like humans, right? Sort of the same, or how many dogs, right? Like, there's sort of like, what is the value creation of a human versus a dog? Sort of like the same with AI. So like, I mean, in this case, the value creation could be hundreds of trillions, if not, after that.
I mean, do you even need this? I mean, if we take every white-collar worker and make them twice as productive with AI, that's in the hundreds of trillions, isn't it?
Yeah, but like, what is twice? If you talk to people at the labs, right, like twice as productive, what does that even mean? It's replace them, right? It's be 10 times better than them. Like, I mean, like, I don't know how soon that.
If white collar work is essentially useless without a constant stream of LLM tokens, right, that make him productive, right? At that point, you basically can tax every single knowledge worker in the world, right? Which is most workers in the world long term.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, what's your guess? Give us a number. What's the cap for NVIDIA?
Cap? I mean, like, why aren't we making a Matryoshka brain? Like, I don't know. I mean, at some point, the machine says humans don't need to live, and I need even more compute.
One step before that, maybe.
Are we colonizing Mars yet?
TBD. Yeah.
I don't know, man. I find it like completely like impossible to predict anything beyond 5 years. Given how much stuff is changing, like what's that? Like
5 is a large number.
I'll leave it to economists, right? Like like honestly, like supply chain stuff is like 3-4 years out, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then 5th year is like sort of like YOLO, right? So like I just try and ground myself in the supply chain stuff, right? Like it's like supply chain, and then like what is the adoption of AI, and what's the value creation, what's the usage, like, and you can see that in like a short horizon. Beyond that, like, I don't know, like, are we all going to be connected to computers, like BCIs and stuff? Like, I don't know, dude. Are humanoid robots, are they going to be, I mean, you saw Elon's thing, right? Like, he's like, yeah, humanoid robots are why Tesla's worth more than 10 trillion. It's like, okay, great. What is all that being trained on? Great, NVIDIA. Okay, awesome. So that's worth also 10 trillion, right? Like, I don't know. Like, it's too out there for me. I don't like the out there discussions.
Very fair.
Read some sci-fi books.
So just pulling on the thread where you talked about, I mean, this is kind of a throwaway comment, but how market share can't really grow just because it's such a dominant market share. And we talked about, or you guys talked about the moat of NVIDIA last time. And obviously this moat is tied to maintaining that very high market share that they currently have. And I love this sort of historic journey you took us through with Huawei just earlier. Can you kind of walk through what NVIDIA did throughout history to build their moat?
It's super awesome because, they failed multiple times in the beginning and they bet the whole company multiple times, right? Like Jensen's just crazy enough to bet the whole company, right? Like whether it was like certain chips ordering volume before he knew it even worked and it was like all the money he had left, or like ordering volumes for projects he had not won yet. Like I heard a rumor that, or not a rumor, but like a story from someone who's like a graybeard in the industry and I think would know, was like, no. Like NVIDIA ordered the volume for the Xbox before Microsoft gave them the order. They're just like, he was just like, fuck it, YOLO. Yeah. Right. I don't know. Like, I don't know how real true this, I'm sure there's more nuance there, like, verbal indication or whatever, but like the order was placed before he got the order, right? Like is what he said. There's cases like with the crypto bubbles, right? Like there was a couple of them, but like NVIDIA did their damn best to convince everyone in the supply chain that it wasn't crypto and that it was gaming, that it was durable, real demand, and it was gaming and data center and professional visualization, and therefore you guys should ramp your production. And they all ramped production, spent all this capex on increasing production and building out new lines for them. And they pay per item, and then they bought them and sold them and made shitloads of money. And then when it all fell apart, they just had to write down a quarter's worth of inventory. Whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone else was like, well, crap, I have all these empty production lines, right? And so it's like,
Totally.
but like, what did AMD do then, right? Their chips were actually better for crypto mining, right? On a amount of silicon, cost versus how much you hash, but like they just didn't. AMD was like, we're gonna not really raise production, right? Like as a reasonable, thing, right? It wasn't it's sort of like strike while the iron's hot. And so like, the same has happened with NVIDIA, right? They've in recent times, like sort of, they've ordered capacity that no one believes, right? Multiple times. They see the end demand, obviously, but in many cases, they're just like, their number for like Microsoft was higher than Microsoft's internal planning, right? And then Microsoft's internal planning went up, but like their number for Microsoft was way higher. And it's like, we just don't think Microsoft's going to need this much, even though they tell us this. It's like, who the heck is like, no, customer, you're going to buy more. Like, and orders, right? And then when the orders come through the supply chain, it's like, I have to pay NCNR, right? Non-cancelable, non-returnable. Like, this is...
Right.
I asked a question in Taiwan once. There was like it was Colette, which is the CFO, and Jensen, CEO. They were both there. And it was a room full of like mostly finance bros, and they're asking stupid finance questions like 3 days before earnings. So obviously they just could not answer anything because it's like, SEC regulations. But then my question to them was like, look, Jensen, you're like so vibes, like driven and like very gut feel and like very visionary. And then Colette's, CFO, like she's amazing in her own right, but like, that those personalities clash. How do you work together? And he's like, I hate spreadsheets. I don't look at them. I just know, right? Like is his response. And it's like, of course, the best innovators in the world have really good gut instinct. Right. And
Right.
so like
Totally.
the gut instinct to like order with non-cancelable when you don't know, and they've had to write down over their history multiple times, right? Many, many billions of dollars in accumulative orders, right? So accumulate in total orders, whether it be, the H20, which is more regulatory, but like other cases they've ordered and had to cancel.
You said many billions?
It's many billions.
Peanuts.
Well, it depends, right? The crypto write-down was like multiple billion when their stock was like less than 100 billion, right? Like it's like it's peanuts.
That's compared to the upside, right?
I think
it's crazy.
I think everything you did was right.
Yeah.
And I think everything AMD did was wrong. Like, in that scenario, but like it is crazy to, especially in a cyclical industry like semiconductors where companies go bankrupt all the time, which is why we have all this consolidation, is every down cycle companies go bankrupt.
I mean, if you look from a risk return perspective, right? These bets were totally worth taking.
Yes.
If you look at it from, I'm a CEO, I want to have predictable quarters for Wall Street, it's a very different story. And I think that's sort of where part of the tension is from, no?
Yeah. So we I don't know if you've seen these like Lee Kuan Yew edits where they're like him like saying some like fiery speech and then it's like some cool music at the end and it's like showing different pictures of him. And so we made one of Jensen recently and put it on social media, right? On like Instagram, XHS, Redbook, right? Twitter, of course, right? Like all the different social media. And and I really liked it because he's like, the goal of like playing is to win, and the reason you win is so you can play again, right? And he compared it to pinball, where like actually you just play all day and you keep getting more rounds, and it's like his whole thing is like, I want to win so I can play the next game. And like it's only about the next generation, right? It's only about now, next generation. It's not about 15 years from now, because it's a whole new playing field every time, or 5 years from now. I think that's you're right. It's the risk reward is correct.
Yeah,
but
there's few people take these kind of risks.
It's the only semiconductor company that's worth, I think even north of $10 billion. That was founded as late as it was. Like MediaTek was in the early 90s, and then NVIDIA, and everyone else is like from the 70s mostly.
Yeah, some big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you raised this great point on these bet the farm, and he's actually been wrong a couple times, to your point.
Mobile, right? Like what the hell happened with mobile?
Exactly, and he still takes them. And I think Mark actually had this great conversation with Eric where he talked about being founder run, where you have this memory of the risks you took to get to where you are today, right? And so in a lot of cases, if you're a CEO brought on later on, you're sort of like, okay, continue to steer the ship as is. But in this case, he remembers all the times they almost went belly up, and he's like, I've got to keep making bets like that. How do you think he's changed? He's been one of the longest running CEOs, over 30. He's kind of right up there with Larry Ellison now. How do you think he's changed over the last 30 years or so?
I mean, obviously, like I'm 29. I don't freaking know what he was like. I've watched a lot of old interviews. I won't say he wasn't
CEO longer than you've been alive.
Yeah, exactly. Like, NVIDIA was founded before I was born. I'm 96, right? Like,
Yeah, maybe anything over the last couple of years.
I think even like watching old interviews, right? Like I watched a lot of old interviews, a lot of old like presentations he's given. One thing is that he's just like sauced up and dripped up, like the charisma he's gotten has only gotten stronger, right? Which is an interesting point. I don't know if it's quite relevant.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
But like the man like has learned to be a rock star more, even though he was always charismatic. It was like he's a complete rock star now, and he was a rock star, a decade ago too. It's just people maybe didn't recognize it. I think the first live presentation that I watched, it was Extreme, was like it was it was CES like 2014 or 2015 or whatever. It's consumer electronics show. I'm like moderating like gaming hardware subreddits, right? Like at the time I'm a teenager, and like the dude is like talking only about AI. He's telling like all these gamers about AlexNet and self-driving cars. Right? It's like, know your audience first of all, but also like has nothing to do with consumer electronics and gaming. At the time I was also like, I was half like, holy crap, this is amazing, but also half like, I want you to announce new gaming GPU, right? Like, but I know like on the forums quickly everyone was like, screw this, I want to hear about the gaming GPUs, NVIDIA's price gouging. Like, of course, NVIDIA's always had the like, we price to value and like plus a little bit, right? Because we're just smart enough to know, I'm guessing Jensen just has the gut feel of how to price things, right? He'll change the price, like, at least on gaming launches, he'll change the price up until like right before the presentation.
Wow.
So like, it really is like a gut feel thing probably. And anyway, so he had that charisma to know what was right, but I think a lot of people were like, oh no, whatever, Jensen's wrong, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But now like he talks, people are like, oh, very, very, so it might just be that he's been right enough.
Yeah, there's a post on X recently that said he had moved up into God mode with a select group of CEOs, but that this was it's exactly
who's the other gods?
It was Zuck. Who are the other gods?
Elon,
Zuck, and Jensen.
Nice. Okay,
good crew to be in.
So we pray to Silicon Valley. The cult now, is it?
Basically. Just on one last thing on people. You mentioned Colette, his CFO, and there's sort of a famously loyal crew at NVIDIA, even though all of the OGs could retire at this point. Is there anyone akin to a Gwynne Shotwell at SpaceX or previously a Tim Cook to Steve Jobs at Apple that is at NVIDIA today?
I mean, he had 2 co-founders, right? Like that's, let's not overlook that. One of them's like, not involved and hasn't been for a long time, but the other one was involved up until just a few years ago, right? So it's not just Jensen running the show, right?
Totally.
Although he was running the show. There's quite a few people on the hardware side. I've always there's someone at NVIDIA that's like mythical to me. Like when you talk to the engineering teams, he leads a lot of the engineering teams. He's a private person, so I don't want to say his name actually.
Okay, fair enough.
But he's like effectively like chief engineering officer is like his role. And people within his org will know who he is. And I think there are people like that, but he's intensely loyal, and there's a number of these types of people. There's another fella who's like, there's all these like innovative ideas at NVIDIA, and he's the guy who literally is like, we need to get this silicon out now. We're cutting features, and that's like what he's famously known for, and all the technologists in NVIDIA hate him. This is like a second guy. This is a second guy. Also intensely loyal to NVIDIA, has been around for a long time, but it's like, it's sort of like when you have such a visionary company and forward, one problem is that you get lost in the sauce, right? I want to make this. It's got to be perfect, amazing. And it's like, you got to have that sort of like, and these people are like, obviously they're close to Jensen for a reason, because Jensen also believes like these things, right? Have the visionary future looking, but also like, screw it, cut it, we'll put it in the next one, ship, right? Like, ship now, ship faster, like in a space like silicon, which is like really hard to do so. And sort of like the thing about NVIDIA that's always been, super impressive, and it's from the beginning days, right? He's talked about this before, is their first chip, their first successful chip, they're going to run out of money. And he had to go get money from other people to even finish the development. And even then, he just had enough money, because he'd already had a failed chip before this, was the chip came back and it had to work, otherwise it would not, And so they were like, because they could only pay for, it's called a mask set, right? Basically, you put these like, I'll call them stencils, into the lithography tool, and then it like says where the patterns are, and you put the stencil in, you deposit stuff, you etch stuff, you deposit materials on the wafer, etch it away, and you put the stencil in, and like you like tell it where to put stuff, right? And then the deposition and etch keeps happening in those spots, and you stack dozens of layers on top of each other, and then you make up a chip. These stencils are custom to each chip, right? And they cost today in the orders of tens and tens of billions of dollars. But even back then, it was still a lot of money. No. It wasn't that much then, of course. It sort of, they could only pay for one set. But the typical thing with semiconductor manufacturing is, as good as you can simulate, as good as you can do all the verification, you'll send a design in and you have to change it. There's going to be something. It's so hard to simulate everything perfectly. And the thing about NVIDIA is they tend to just get it right the first time. Yeah. Even great executing companies like AMD or Broadcom or whoever, they often have to ship, they're denoted in like A and then a number, or B and then a number. So it's like two different parts of the masks. So like NVIDIA always ships A0. Almost always. They sometimes ship A1. And a lot of times, even if they'll start production of the A is basically the transistor layer, then the number is like the wiring that connects all the transistors together. So NVIDIA will start production of the A and ramp it really high, and then just hold it right before you transition to the metal, just in case they do need to change the metal layers. And so like the moment they're ready and they've confirmed that it works, they can just, blast through a lot of production. Whereas everyone else is like, oh, let's get the chip back. Oh, okay, A0 doesn't work. We got to make this tweak, and the chip back. Yeah. It's called a stepping, right?
At Intel, we were very jealous of NVIDIA at that time, right? They consistently delivered in the first one, we did not. So it was
the data center CPU group. There was one product where, I said A1, A0, A1, or you go to B if you have to change the transistor layer as well. So it's like B. Intel got to like E2 once. E2, like that's like a 15 revision. This is like the peak of AMD's like when they went skyrocketing on market share versus Intel was when Intel was at E2, right? Like 15 steppings.
They call this quarters of delay, right? I mean, it's catastrophic for a go-to-market.
Yeah, each time is a quarter of delay or something, right? Yeah. So it's absurd. So I think that's the other thing about NVIDIA is like, screw it, let's ship it, let's get the volume ASAP, let's do these things that, and so anyways, they like, have some of the best simulation, verification, et cetera, that lets them sort of go from design, from idea to shipment as fast as possible, cutting out any unnecessary features that could delay it, making sure they don't have to do revisions so that they can get, they can respond to the market ASAP. Mm-hmm. There's a story about how Volta, which was the first NVIDIA chip with tensor cores, they saw all the AI stuff on the prior generation P100 Pascal, and they decided we should go all in on AI, and they added the tensor cores to Volta like only a handful of months before they sent it to the fab. Like they said, screw it, let's change it. And that's crazy. And it's like, if they hadn't done that, maybe someone else would have taken the AI chip market, right? Yeah. So there's all these times where those are major changes, but there's often like minor things that you have to tweak, right? Number formats or like some architectural detail. And NVIDIA's just so fast.
And the other crazy thing is they have a software division that can't keep up with that, right? I mean, if you come out with the chip, right, and basically no stepping required, it's immediately in the market, then being ready with drivers and all the infrastructure on top of it, that's just super impressive. Right?
Yeah, I love that point because you think of NVIDIA benefiting from tailwind after tailwind, but I think both of you are saying you have to move fast enough and execute well enough to take advantage of those tailwinds. And if you think about, and by the way, I loved your CES story. I'm just envisioning him more than 10 years ago talking about self-driving cars. But, if you think about nailing the video game tailwind, VR, Bitcoin mining, obviously AI now, one of the things that Jensen talks about today is robotics, AI factories. Maybe my last question on NVIDIA, what do you think about the next 10 to 15 years? I know calling beyond 5 is hard. But like, what does NVIDIA's business look like?
It's really a question of, and this is like, I think every time I've talked to, some executives at NVIDIA have asked this question because I really want to know, and they won't answer it obviously, but it's like, what are you going to do with your balance sheet? Like, you are the most high cash flow company in like you have so much cash flow. Now the hyperscalers are all taking their cash flow like way down, right? Because they're spending on GPUs. What are you gonna do with all this cash flow, right? Like, even before this whole takeoff, he wasn't allowed to buy ARM, right? So what can he do with all this capital and all this cash, right? Even this $5 billion investment in Intel is. There's regulatory scrutiny there, right? Like, it's in the announcement, like, this is subject to review, right? Like, I imagine that'll get passed, but like, he can't buy anything big. He's going to have hundreds of billions of dollars of cash on his balance sheet. What do you do? Is it start to build AI infrastructure in data centers? Maybe. But like, why would you do that if you can just get other people to do it and just take the cash?
Well, he's investing in those, right?
Investing peanuts. Right? Like he gave recently like a CoreWeave a backstop because today it's really hard to find a large number of GPUs for burst capacity, right? Like, hey, I want to train a model for 3 months, right? I have my base capacity where I don't know my experiments, but I want to train a big model 3 months done.
We know from our portfolio.
Yeah. So like NVIDIA sees this issue. They think it's a real problem with startups. It's why the labs have such an advantage. But what if I could, right now, like, most companies in the Valley spend, 75% of their round on GPUs, right? Or at least, with CD. What if you could do 75% in 3 months on one model run, right? And really scale and have some sort of like competitive product, and then you have the model, then you raise more capital, right? Or start deploying, right? What do you do with it? Is it start buying a crap load of humanoid robots and deploying them, but like they don't really make good software. They don't make really that amazing software for them in terms of the models, right? They make the layer below is great. Where they deploy their capital is like the question.
He has been investing up and down the supply chain a little bit though, right? Investing in the neo clouds, investing in some of the model training companies.
Yeah, but again, it's small fries. Like He could have just done the entire Anthropic round if he wanted to. Of course he didn't, right? And then like really got them to use GPUs. Or like he could have done the entire, OpenAI round. He could have done the entire like any XAI round.
Do you think these are things he should be doing, or what's your...
I mean, like,
Yeah, good question.
I don't know, right? I think like
We'll quote you for the next round that we're ready. But anyways,
he could make venture a dead industry. No, just kidding. Take all of the best rounds.
That is a lot of business, yeah.
You can do the seeds and then have Jensen mark you up. That's why we're like no, I don't think
I like it.
I think like picking winners is obviously really tough for him because he has customers all across this ecosystem. If he starts picking winners, then like his customers will be even more anxious to leave and give even more effort to whether it's AMD or some startup or their internal efforts. Et cetera, right? Buying TPUs, whatever it is, like, people will, he can't just like invest in these, like, he can do a little bit, right? A few $100 million in an open AI round is fine, or a few $100 million in an XAI round is fine. CoreWeave, right? Like, yeah, everyone's like throwing a fuss about it, but it's like he invested a couple $100 million plus, early on, plus, rented a cluster from them for internal development purposes instead of renting it from a hyperscaler, which is cheaper for NVIDIA to do, right? It's better for them to do it from them than the hyperscalers. It's like, is he really backstopping CoreWeave that much, right? Or, any of the other customers or neo clouds? Like there's some investment, but it's like, it's more like, this is a good cloud, we'll throw like 5 or 10% of the round, right? It's not, he's taking 50% plus of the round.
Is he also reshaping his market? I mean, look, a couple of years ago, there were 4 big purchases of these cards. You just listed 6. To what extent is that's him and Nevius and there's a long list there. Of course,
Yeah.
Is that a strategy?
It is. I think it absolutely is. But he didn't have to put much capital down to do this. Like what?
Just chip one earlier than the other? I don't know. Yeah, that's
no. But it's like if you look at the grand amount of capital that he spent investing in the neo clouds, it's a few billion dollars.
But he has a lot of other levers if he wants to.
Right. Allocations, as you mentioned. What's nice is historically you gave volume discounts to the hyperscalers. But because he can use the argument of antitrust, he's like, everyone gets the same price. As
so fair.
It's very fair. It's very fair,
So what should he do with the or what should guide his
I mean, I think like there's the argument he should invest in data centers and only the data center layer, not what goes in the data center, so that more people build data centers. And then if the market demand continues to grow up, data centers and power are not the issue, right? Invest in data centers and power. I've said that to them. They should invest in data centers and power, not in the cloud layer, because the cloud layer is quite not commoditized, but quite it's commoditized or complement, right? Is the whole phrase. And I won't say being a cloud is commoditized, but it's certainly like you have a lot of competitors who are decent now. And you've educated the commercial real estate and other infrastructure investment firms into going into AI infra as well. So like I don't think it's the cloud layer that you invest in, right? Do you invest in data centers and energy? Yeah. Do you invest in, because that's the bottleneck for your growth really, is A, well, how much people want to spend and can spend, and B, the ability to actually put them in data centers. And then like robotics and like, I think there's like areas he could invest in, but nothing requires $300 billion of capital. So what do you do with the capital? Like, I really don't know. And I like feel like Jensen has to have some idea. There's some visionary plan here, because that's what shapes the company, right? I mean, they could sell, they could just continue to, I mentioned $200 billion of free cash flow, $250 billion of free cash flow a year. What do they do with it? Like, do they just buy back stock forever? Like, do they go Apple route? And the reason why Apple hasn't done anything interesting in like, nearly a decade is they've got a not visionary at the head. Tim Cook's great at supply chain. And they're just plowing the money into buybacks. They're not really, automotive, the self-driving car thing failed. We'll see what happens with AR, VR. We'll see what happens with wearables, right? But like Meta and OpenAI might be even better than them. We'll see, like, and others, right? So what does he invest in? I have no clue. But nothing. What requires so much capital? Is the tough question. It actually gets a return.
Yeah.
Because the easy thing is like my cost of equity, right? I just buy back.
And doesn't completely change the company culture. I think that's another thing, right? There are probably areas you could invest it in, but you suddenly end up with the company doing two completely different things, which are very difficult to keep on.
But they do like 10 completely different things, right? I mean, one way to look at it is we build AI infrastructure. And in the guise of we build AI infrastructure, robots, humanoids around the world are AI infrastructure. Or data centers and energy is AI infrastructure, right? Like,
So the humanoids would totally work, right? If you're suddenly pouring concrete and building power plants, it has completely different culture, completely different set of people. It's much, much harder.
Agree. But there's different ways to do it, like invest in the various companies or like backstop like the building of power plants, right? Like, because no one wants to build power plants because they're 30-year underwriting things. There's all these different areas where could it use capital to, allow something to happen, right? Not necessarily owning it himself.
Mm-hmm. And look, looking back at my time at Intel, one of the biggest problems we had was that our customer base sucked, right? I mean, we were selling to, most of the chips went to the large hyperscalers, which they're way too concentrated, and they build their own chips, and so you can push down your prices. So honestly, spending it on diversifying the cloud, the
the problem was in 2014, you guys should have just charged so much that your margins were 80%. What would the world have done? Nothing.
The margins were pretty good back then. That wasn't the problem. That was the primary problem.
They were 60, 65. They were 80.
Still, yeah. Oh, boy.
That was Jensen. It's when Jensen would have
PTSD is kicking in here.
Well, wait, I think Guido's comment is actually a really good segue into something else we wanted to talk to you about, which is the hyperscalers. And one of the reasons that I love reading semi-analysis is you guys make these out of consensus calls that you're often right about. And one of them recently was calling.
Only often?
You have a Jensen hit rate. It's very high. But
where's my $1 billion, EV positive bet?
But the one that caught my eye was Amazon's AI resurgence. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, just because, I think we found it pretty interesting being on the ground, helping our portfolio companies pick who their partners are. And so we have some micro data on this, but you sort of walk through why they're behind.
Yeah. So in Q1 2023, I wrote an article called Amazon's Cloud Crisis. And it was about all these neoclouds are going to commoditize Amazon. It was about how Amazon's entire infrastructure was really good for the last era of computing, right? Mm-hmm. What they do with their Elastic Fabric, ENA and EFA, right? Their NICs, what they and the whole protocol and everything behind them, what they do for custom CPUs, et cetera, right? Like, is really good for the last era of scale out computing and not this era of sort of scale up AI infra. And how neoclouds were going to commoditize them, and how their silicon teams were focused on cost optimization, whereas the name of the game today is max performance per cost, right? But like that often means you just drive up performance like crazy. Even if cost doubles, you drive up performance more, triples, because then the cost per performance falls still. That's sort of the name of the game today with NVIDIA's hardware. And it ended up being like really good call. Everyone like was calling us out like, no, you're wrong. And this was like when Amazon was like the best stock, and Microsoft really hadn't like started taking off yet, and nor had like all these other Oracle and so on and so forth. And since then, Amazon has been the worst performing hyperscaler.
Totally.
And the call here is that they still have structural issues, right? They still use Elastic Fabric, although that's getting better. Still behind NVIDIA's networking, still behind Broadcom's / Arista, like type networking NICs. They still use their internal AI chip is okay, but the main thing is that they're now waking up and being able to actually capture business, right? So the main call here is that since that report, AWS has been decelerating revenue. Year-on-year revenue has been falling consistently. And our big call is that it's actually going to start re-accelerating, right? And that's because of Anthropic. It's because of all the work we do on data centers, right? Tracking every single data center, when that goes online and what's in there. The flow through on cost, right? If you know how much the chips cost, the networking cost, the power cost, you know how much generally margins are for these things, then you can sort of start estimating revenue. So when we build all that up, it's very clear to us that they trough on AWS revenue growth this quarter, right? This is the lowest AWS revenue growth
yeah.
will be on a year-over-year basis for at least the next year, right? And it's re-accelerating to north of 20% again because of all these massive data centers they have online with Trainium and GPUs, right? Depends on which one. It depends on which customer. The experience is not as good as, say, a CoreWeave or whatever, but the name of the game is capacity today. CoreWeave can only deploy so much. They only can get so much data center capacity, and they're really fast at building. But the company with the most data center capacity in the world, that and still today, although they may get passed up in the next 2 years, is Amazon. Actually, they will get passed up based on what we see is Amazon, but incrementally, Amazon still has the most spare data center capacity that's going to ramp into AI revenue over the next year.
Let me ask one question. Is that the right type of data center capacity? Like for the high density AI build-outs today, you need massively more cooling. You need to have enough water close by. You need to have enough power close by. Is it in the right place, or is it the wrong type of data?
So data center capacity, in this sense, I mean all the way from power secured to substations built to transformers to you can provide the power whips to the racks. Now, obviously, the data center capacity will differ, right? Historically, actually, Amazon's had the highest density data centers in the world, right? They went to like 40 kilowatt racks when everyone was still at 12. And if you've ever stepped foot inside of most data centers, they're like pretty cool and dry-ish. If you step inside of an Amazon data center, they feel like a swamp. It feels like where I grew up, right? It's like it's like humid and hot because they're like optimizing every percentage. And so sort of like your point in here is that like Amazon's data centers aren't equipped for the new type of infrastructure. But when you compare them to the cost of the GPU, like getting having a complex cooling arrangement is fine, right? We made a call on Astera Labs a couple months ago, when they were like at 90, and it's gone to 250 the month after, because of what orders Amazon is placing with them. But there's certain things with Amazon's infrastructure, I won't get too much into it, but their rack infrastructure requires them using a lot more of like Astera Labs connectivity products, and the same applies to cooling, right? So it's on the networking and cooling side. They just have to use a lot more of this stuff. But again, this stuff is inconsequential in cost compared to the GPU.
You can build, right? My question was more like, look, I may need a major river close by for cooling at this point, right? It's in many areas I just can't get enough water. And, there's probably power in the same region.
There's 2 gigawatt scale sites that they have power all secured, wet chillers and dry chillers all secured. Like everything's fine. It's just not as efficient, but that's fine, right? Like, they're going to ramp the revenue. They're going to have the revenue. Not that I necessarily think Amazon's internal models are going to be great, or, hey, their internal chip is better than NVIDIA's or competitive with TPU, or their hardware architecture is the best. I don't necessarily think that's the case. But they can build a lot of data centers, and they can fill them up with stuff that will be rented out, right? And it's a pretty simple thesis.
How important has Anthropic been to the co-design for Trainium? Because I remember we had a portfolio company, this was summer 2023. They invited them to AWS. They spent, I think 8 hours with them over the course of a week trying to figure out Trainium back then. It was just impossible to work through. Is that, that obviously that portfolio company hasn't gone back and tried it now, but like how different is it now based on what you're hearing? And...
Oh, it's still bad.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
It's tough to use. So there's sort of like, this is sort of the argument that every inference company offers, right? Including the AI hardware startups, is because I'm only running like 3 different models at most, I can just hand optimize everything and write kernels for everything, and even like go down to like an assembly level, right?
How hard can it be? Yeah.
It is pretty hard. It is pretty hard. But like you tend to do this for production inference anyways. Like you aren't using cuDNN, which is NVIDIA's like library that's like super easy to generate to generate kernels and stuff, right? Like not generate kernels, but anyways, you're not using these like ease of use libraries. When you're running inference, you're either using Cutlass or stamping out your own PTX or, you know, in some cases, people are even going down to the SaaS level, right? And like when you look at like, say, an OpenAI or like, you know, an Anthropic, when they run inference on GPUs, they're doing this, right? And the ecosystem is not that amazing once you get all the way down to that level. It's not like using NVIDIA GPUs is easy now. I mean, you have an intuitive understanding of the hardware architecture because you work on it so much and everyone's worked on it and you can talk to other people. But at the end of the day, it's not like easy, right? Whereas, you know, Anthropic, Trainium, or TPUs, actually the hardware architecture is a little bit more simple than a GPU. Larger, more simple cores rather than having all this functionality, you know, less general. So it's a little bit easier to code on. There's tweets from Anthropic people saying they, when they're doing that low level, actually they prefer working on Trainium and TPU because of the simplicity.
Really? Huh.
Now,
Interesting.
to be clear, Trainium and TPU, Trainium especially is very hard to use.
Yeah.
Like, not for the faint of heart. It's very difficult, but you can do it if you're just running, like, if I'm Anthropic and I must only run Claude 4.1 Opus, 4 Sonnet, and screw it, I won't even run Haiku. I'll just run Haiku on like on GPUs or whatever, right? I'm just gonna run 2 models. And actually, screw it, I'm just gonna run Opus on GPUs too, and true TPUs. Sonnet is the majority of my traffic anyways. I could spend the time. And how often am I changing that architecture? Every 4 or 6 months, right? Like, how much?
It's not even changing that much, honestly, right?
I think from 3 to 4 definitely did change, right?
Yeah, I mean, define architectural change. You know, at a high level, like the primitives are more or less the same across the last couple of generations.
I don't know enough about Anthropic's model architecture to be honest, but I think from what I've seen at other places, there have been enough changes that it takes time to, you know, program this and really get the main thing is, like, you know, if I'm Anthropic and I have 7 billion ARR now or whatever, north of 10, you know, by the end of next year, north of 20, right? Like, ARR is like maybe even 30 is like, that's, and my margins are 50%, 70%. That's $15 billion of Trainium that I need, right? That can run on Sonnet. And most of that's going to be Sonnet 3, 5, or 4, 5, whatever it is, right? It's going to be one model serving most of the use cases. So, like, you know, I could spend the time and it'll work on this hardware.
Yeah, totally. Maybe on the topic of non-consensus calls you've made, and maybe I'll move to another cloud. In June, you guys said that Oracle is winning the AI compute market. And then in this pod, we've already referenced the big jump, obviously, that Oracle had. I think it was the single largest gain that a company with over 500 billion in market cap has ever had. So an enormous
was the 2023 Q1 NVIDIA not bigger? It might have been smaller. Okay.
I think it was maybe close. We'll fact check ourselves.
That's good. That's amazing.
But you know, obviously this is the massive commitment that was announced. Can you walk us through why you made that call then, and just sort of why Oracle is poised to do so well in such a competitive space?
Yeah. So Oracle, they're the largest balance sheet in the industry that is not dogmatic to any type of hardware, right? They're not dogmatic to any type of networking. They will deploy Ethernet with Arista. They'll deploy Ethernet through their own white boxes. They'll deploy NVIDIA networking, InfiniBand or Spectrum X. And they have really good network engineers. They have really great software across the board, right? Again, like ClusterMax. They were ClusterMax Gold because their software is great. There's a couple things that they needed to add that would take them higher, and they're adding those, right? To Platinum, right? Which was where CoreWeave was. And so, like, when you couple 2 things, right? Like, OpenAI's got insane compute demand. Microsoft is quite pansy. They're not willing to invest in. They don't believe OpenAI can actually pay the amount of money, right? I mentioned earlier, right?
Right.
The $300 billion deal, OpenAI, you don't have $300 billion. And Oracle's willing to take the bet. Now, of course, the bet is a bit like, there's a bit more security in the bet in that Oracle really only needs to secure the data center capacity, right? So this is sort of like how we came across the bet, right? And we've been telling our institutional clients, especially in like a super detailed way, whether it be the hyperscalers or AI labs or semiconductor companies or, you know, investors, in our data center model, because we're tracking every single data center in the world. Oracle doesn't build their own data centers either, right? By the way, they get them from other companies. They co-engineer, but they don't physically build them themselves. And so they're quite nimble in terms of like being able to assess new data centers, engineer them. So we saw all these different data centers Oracle was snatching up in deep discussions, snatching up, signing, etc. And so we have, hey, gigawatt here, gigawatt there, right? Abilene, 2 gigawatts, right? You have all these different sites that they're signing up in discussions with, and we're noting them. And then we had the timeline because we're tracking the entire supply chain. We're tracking all the permits, regulatory filings, through language models, using satellite photos constantly, and then supply chain of like chillers, transformer equipment, generators, etc. We're able to make a pretty strong estimate of quarter by quarter in our data center model, quarter by quarter, how much power there is for each of these sites, right? So some of these sites that we know of aren't even ramping until 2027, but we know that Oracle signed it, right? And we have the sort of ramp path. So then it's this question of like, okay, let's say you have a megawatt, right? Like for simplicity's sake, which is a ton of power, but now it doesn't feel like much. It's, we're in the gigawatt era. But if you're talking about a megawatt, right? You fill it up with GPUs. How much do the GPUs for a megawatt cost, right? Or actually, it's like even simpler to do the math, right? If I'm talking about a GV200, right? Each individual GPU is 1,200 watts. But when you talk about the CPU, the whole system, it's roughly 2,000 watts. At the same time, all in, everything, simplicity's sake, $50,000 per GPU, right? The GPU doesn't cost them. There's all the peripheries, right? So $50,000 CapEx for 2,000 watts. So $25,000 for 1,000 watts. And then what's the rental price for GPU? If you're on a really long-term deal, volume, 270, right? 260 in that range. Then you end up with, it costs like $12 million per megawatt to rent a megawatt.
Yeah.
And then each chip is different. So we track each chip, what the CapEx is, what the networking is. So you know what each chip is. You can predict what what chips they're putting in which data centers, when those data centers go online, how many megawatts by quarter. And then you end up with, Stargate goes online in this time period. They're going to start renting at this time. It's this many chips, each Stargate site, right? And so therefore, this is how much OpenAI would have to spend to rent it. And then you prick that out, and we were able to predict Oracle's revenue with pretty high certainty, and we matched pretty dead on what they announced for 25, 26, 27, and we were pretty close on 28. The surprise for us was that, they announced some stuff that 28, 29 data centers that they we haven't found yet, but we'll find them, right? Of course. And sort of like this methodology lets you see sort of, hey, what data centers are you getting? How much power? What are they signing? How much incremental revenue that is when that comes online. And so that's sort of the basis of our Oracle bet. Obviously, in the newsletter, we included a lot less detail, but sort of it was that thesis, right? That like, hey, they have all this capacity, they're going to sign these deals. And in our newsletter, we talked about two main things. We talked about the OpenAI business, and then we talked about the ByteDance business. And presumably tomorrow, on Friday, there's going to be an announcement about TikTok and all this. But like the ByteDance business, huge amounts of data center capacity that Oracle is also going to lease out to ByteDance, right? And so we did the same methodology there. With ByteDance, it's pretty certain they'll pay because they're a profitable company. With OpenAI, it's not. And so there's got to be some like error bars as you go further out in terms of like, will OpenAI exist in 28, 29, 30, and will they be able to pay the $80+ billion a year that they've signed up to Oracle with, right? That's the only like risk here. And if that happens, then Oracle's downside is also somewhat protected because they only signed the data center, which is a minority of the cost, right? The GPUs are everything. And the GPUs they purchase 1 to 2 quarters before they start renting them. So they're not, the downside risk is pretty low for them in terms of if they don't get the deal, well, they don't get the revenue, but it's not like they're stuck with a bunch of assets they bought that are worthless.
Yeah.
Is there another angle here? I mean, OpenAI and Microsoft were sort of BFFs, and now they filed divorce papers, and they just want to diversify, and then that's pushing them away towards other providers.
Yeah, so Microsoft was exclusive compute provider. It got reorged to right of first refusal. and then Microsoft.
Is it no last choice or something like that?
No, it's still right of first refusal, but it's like Microsoft.
Those two are not mutually exclusive.
Well, if OpenAI is like, we're going to sign a $80 billion contract or a $300 billion contract for the next 5 years, you guys want it? Or it's like, and they're like, no, what? Okay, cool, right? It's like, and then they go to Oracle, right? And it's OpenAI is like sort of like. This is the OpenAI needs someone with a balance sheet to actually be able to pay for it, right? Because and then they'll make tons of money if off of OpenAI on the margins on the compute and the infra and all these things. But someone's got to have a balance sheet, and OpenAI doesn't have a balance sheet. Oracle does, although given the scale of what they signed, we had also had another source of information, which was that they were talking to debt markets, right? Because Oracle actually just needs to raise debt to pay for this many GPUs over time. Now, they won't do it like immediately. Like they can pay for everything this year and next year from their own cash. But like in 27, 28, 29, they'll start to have to use debt to pay for these GPUs, which is what, CoreWeave has done. And many of the neoclouds, most of it's debt financed. Even Meta went and got debt for their Louisiana mega data center. Not because it's cheaper than, it's literally better on a financial basis to do buybacks with your cash and get debt because the debt is cheaper than the return on your stock. Like it's like a financial engineering thing, but like, who's out there, right? It could be Amazon, it could be Google, it could be Microsoft.
It was a very short list.
Or it could be Oracle or Meta, right? Meta's obviously not. Microsoft's chickened out. Amazon, Google, and Oracle, right? That's all that's left.
Google would be an awkward fit. So
yeah, Google would be an awkward fit. Amazon would be a fine fit, but exactly, right? It's like it's a very
philanthropic, yeah. Well, I guess maybe on the topic of these giant data center buildouts, you guys just released a piece on XAI and Colossus 2. Are you getting less impressed by these feats of building something this massive in 6 months, or is it still very impressive to you guys?
This is the thing I've said about AI researchers is that they're like the first class of humans to think about things on an order of magnitude scale. Yeah. Whereas like people have always thought about things in terms of like percentage growth, like ever since industrialization. And before that, it was just like absolute numbers, right? Sort of like humanity is evolving in terms of how we think because things are changing faster.
Sure. Everything is log scale.
And so like, it was like really impressive when GPT, 2 was trained on so many chips, and then GPT-3 was trained on that, like on 20K A100s and, GPT-4 and 20K A100s, GPT, sort of like, it's like, holy crap. And then it was like, the era of 100K GPUs clusters, right? And we did some reports around 100K GPU clusters, but now there's like 10 100K GPU clusters in the world. I was like, okay, this is kind of boring. But it's like 100K GPUs is like, over 100 megawatts. Now it's like, like literally, we in our Slack and some of these channels like, we found another 200 megawatt data center. There's someone who like puts the yawning emoji every time, and I'm like, dude, what? Like now it's only exciting if you do gigawatt scale
like
data centers.
Gigawatt era, yeah.
And I'm sure like I'm not sure. Maybe we'll start yawning to that too. But like the log scale of this is like the capital numbers are crazy, right? Like it's crazy enough that OpenAI did like $100 billion trading run. Like then they did $1 billion trading run. Now we're talking about $10 billion trading runs, right? Like it's crazy that we think in log scale, but yes, things are only impressive when they do it. Like what Elon's doing. So what Elon's doing in Tennessee in Memphis, first time was crazy, right? 100K GPUs in 6 months. He bought a factory in like February of 24, and had models training within 6 months, right? And he did liquid cooling, first large scale data center with liquid at this scale for AI, doing liquid cooling, like all these sorts of crazy firsts, putting generators outside, like cat turbines, all these things for different things to get the power, mobile substations, all these different crazy things, tapping the natural gas line that's like running alongside the factory, all these. Yeah. So he does this. It's like, holy crap. And he did it for 100K GPUs.
Right.
200, 300 megawatts, right? Now he's doing it for a gigawatt scale. and he's doing it just as fast, right? And so like you would think like this is obviously way more impressive that he did it again.
Yeah.
But like
Fair.
maybe I'm desensitized, but like it's like, you know, like you've given the child too much candy, right?
Exactly.
And now like the child has no, you know, is like, you know, doesn't like apples, right? Like I don't know. So like a gigawatt data center. There was all these protests around his Memphis facility. People were like, oh, you're destroying the air, and it's like, have you looked around that area of Memphis? Like, there is like a gigawatt gas turbine plant that's just powering generally that area. There's a sewage plant that's servicing the entire city of Minnesota, or sorry, city of Memphis. And there's like open air pits of like there's open air mining. Like there's all sorts of disgusting shit around there, which is needed, right? We need that stuff to have a country run, right? Like to be clear. And you know, it's like people are complaining about like a couple hundred megawatts of generation. So he got like protests from all sorts of people. You know, you got super into the politics side of things. Right. NAACP even protested him. Like, and so like he really got like some local municipalities to be like, oh, I don't like, you know, like this. And so he couldn't do as much as he wanted to in Memphis. But he still needed the data center to be close because he wanted to connect these data centers super high bandwidth, super close. And he also already had a lot of infrastructure set up there. So he bought another distribution center at this time. And it's still in Memphis, but the cool thing about Memphis is it's right across the border from Mississippi, right? So now, you know, it's like 10 miles away from his original one, but his facility is like a mile away from Mississippi, and he bought a power plant in Mississippi, and he's putting turbines there. Because the regulation is completely different, right? And if the question is really like galvanize resources and build it really fast, maybe Elon is ahead of everyone. You know, he hasn't made the best model yet, or he doesn't have the best model, at least today, I think. You know, you could argue Grok 4 was the best for a little period of time, but like, you know, it's truly amazing how fast he's able to build these things. And for first principles, it's like most people are like, fuck, like, you know, we can't build the power. We can't do power here anymore. I guess we have to find a new site. And it's like, no, just go across the border.
Go to Mississippi.
And my favorite thing is like Arkansas is right there, so Mississippi gets mad, you know. I don't know, you know, the regulations.
All future data centers, you know, built in places where multiple states meet. Is that the
4 quarters? Yeah.
The optimal I think there's one. There we go. Is there a point in the U.S. with 5? I know there's a point with 4. 4 states intersect there. Yeah. Maybe that's recording a data center kind of soon. All right.
I'm going to buy real estate in that area. Front run it. Well, I guess on the topic of just maybe new hardware, you had this piece analyzing TCO for GB200s. And I'm kind of going to ask this question on behalf of our portfolio companies, which it sounds like you're helping them already. But one of the findings that I thought was really interesting was TCO was sort of 1.6x H100s for GB200s. And so obviously, you know, there's this point on, okay, that's sort of the benchmark for the performance boosts that you're going to need to at least make the sort of performance cost ratio benefit from switching over. Maybe just talk about what you've seen from a performance standpoint, and what do you recommend to portfolio companies, maybe in a smaller scale than XAI, who are, you know, thinking about new hardware, try to get it. There's capacity constraints, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, right? Is with each generation of GPU, it gets so much faster that you end up like you want the new one. And you know, in some metrics, you could say GB200 is 3 times faster than, or 2 times faster than the prior generation. Other metrics, you can say it's way more than that, right? So if you're doing pre-training versus inference, right?
They can run everything 4-bit, right?
Yeah, if you can run it 4-bit or just inference and take advantage of the huge NVLink, NVL72, you know, there's ways you could squint and say GB200 is only 2x faster than H100, in which case 1.6x TCO. Right. It's, you know, it's worthwhile, right? It's worth going to the next gen.
But more marginal.
It's more marginal. Yeah. It's not a big deal. Then there's other cases where it's like, well, if you're running DeepSeek inference, the performance difference per GPU is like north of like 6-7x, and it continues to optimize. You know, for DeepSeek inference. And so you know, then it's like, well, I'm only paying 60% more for 6x. And it's like,
Right.
it's a 4x or 3x performance per dollar gain. Like, absolutely, right? And if you're like running inference of DeepSeek, that can also include RL, right? And so the question is sort of, and then the other question is like, well, the GPU is new. You know, there's also B200, there's GB200, there's B200. B200 is much more simple from a hardware perspective. It's just 8 GPUs in a box. So then it's not as much of a performance gain, especially in inference. But you have all the stability, right? It's an 8 GPU box. It's not going to be unreliable. The GB200s are still having some reliability challenges. Those are being worked through. It's getting better and better by the day, but it's still a challenge. But you know, when you have a GB2, when you have a H100, right, box, or H200, 8 GPUs, one of them fails, you take the entire server offline, you have to fix it, right? So usually if your cloud's good, they'll swap it in, right? But if it's GB200, what do you now do with 72 GPUs? If one fails, do you brick the whole thing and you get a new 72? The blast radius of a failure, right? Note, GPU failure rates at best are the same and likely worse, right? Gen on gen, because everything's getting hotter, faster, et cetera. So at best, the failure rates are the same. Even if you model the failure rates as the exact same, because you go from 1 out of 8 to 1 out of 72, it's a huge problem. So now what a lot of people are doing is they run a high priority workload on 64 of them, and then the other 8, you run low priority workloads, which is then like, okay, this is this whole like infrastructure challenge. Like I have to have high priority workloads, I have to have low priority workloads. When a high priority workload has a failure, instead of taking the whole rack offline, you just take some of the GPUs from the low priority one, put it in the high priority one, and then like you just let the dead GPU sit there until you service the rack at a later date. And it's like there's all these like complicated infrastructure things that make it so, oh wait, actually that 3x or 2x performance increase in pre-training is lower because the downtime is higher. Slash, I'm not using all the GPUs always. Slash, I'm not able to, I'm not smart enough, or I don't have the infra to like have low priority and high priority workloads. Like it's not impossible.
Yeah.
The labs are doing it, right? Like it's just.
I mean, if I'm running a cloud, it's actually really hard, right? Because I probably have to rent the spot one, like the spares out of spot instance or something.
No. Because it's a coherent domain. It's NVLink. You don't want anyone touching that. So it has to be the end customer.
Doesn't have to leave them as empty spares. That's even worse.
No, the end customer usually will just be like, I want them and I will, and the SLAs and the pricing, everything is like accounting for that, right? So like generally when you have a cloud, you have an SLA, right? That is, hey, it's going to be uptime is going to be 99%, blah, 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 right? For this period. With GB200, it's 99% for 64 GPUs, not 72. And then it's like 95% for 72. Now, it differs across every cloud. Every cloud has a different SLA.
Got it, yeah.
But like, they've adjusted for this because they're like, look, this hardware is just finicky. Do you still want it? We will credit you in that 64 of them will always work, right? Not 72. And so like, there's this whole like finicky nature, and the end customer has to be capable of dealing with the unreliability. And it's like, and the end customer can just continue to use B200, right? Performance gains not as much. The whole reason you want this 72 domain is so you can have, some of these gains.
Right.
But you have to be smart enough to be able to do it. And that's challenging for small companies.
Totally.
So NVIDIA just announced the Rubin prefill cards, like CTX or CPX. There we go. What's your take on that? Does it cannibalize?
Dude, by the way, I don't know if this is like brain rot or like, I don't know, but like, I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. But I know the model number of every fucking chip. Like,
haunts you in your dreams.
We're broken.
Living the dream.
No.
Why do you pre-announce a product that's 5x faster for certain use cases? Is it that much?
I think it's like a thing, right? Like, historically, AI chips were AI chips, right? And then we started getting a lot of people saying, this is a training chip, this is an inference chip. Actually, training and inference are switching so fast in terms of what they require that like now it's like still like one chip. Actually, there are still workload level dynamics that like differ, but the main workload is inference, even in training, right? Exactly. Because of RL, most of that is generating stuff in an environment and trying to achieve a reward, right? So it's inference still, right? Training is now becoming mostly dominated by inference as well, but inference has like two main operations, right? There is calculating the KV cache for prefill, right? Here's all these documents. do the attention between all of them, right? Between all the tokens, however, whatever type of attention you use. And then there's decode, which is auto-regressively generate each token. These are very, very different workloads. And so initially, the ideas or infrastructure techniques, the ML systems techniques were, oh, okay, I will just make the batch size every single, forward pass this big. And it, if I make it, I'll make it 1,000 big. And maybe I'll run 32 users concurrently. That way, now I still have, 900 something left, 960 left, right? That 960 is actually doing the prefill for, if a request comes in, it chunks it. It's called trunk prefill. You prefill chunks of it. Now you get really good utilization on GPUs. But then that ends up like impacting the decode workers, right? The people who are auto-aggressively generating each token end up having slower TPS. And tokens per second is really important for user experience and all these other things, right? So then the idea is like, okay, these two workloads are so different, and they are literally different, right? You prefill and then you decode. It's not like you're interleaving them. So why don't we split them entirely? And this is done on the same type of chip, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, Google.
Pretty much everybody does that.
Everyone good.
Yeah,
everyone good.
The big guys. Yeah.
Together, Fireworks, all these guys do prefill decode, disaggregated prefill decode. So they run prefill on a set of GPUs, decode on a certain set of GPUs. Why is this beneficial? Because you can auto scale them, right? You can, hey, all of a sudden I have a lot more long context workers. I allocate more resources to prefill. All of a sudden I have not all of a sudden, but over time my traffic mix is not long input, short output. It's short input, long output. I have more decode workers. This way I can guarantee, and so now I can auto scale the resources differently, and I can also guarantee that my prefill time is, by the time, what's really important in search is how fast you get the page to start loading, not when does the resource happen. What do people do in games? Like the loading screen often has some sort of interactive environment, or it blends in over time, or whatever it is. It has tips and tricks, ways to distract you. The same thing is, there's like studies and papers out there that users prefer a faster time to first token, right? First token gets streamed to me sooner, even if the total time to get all my tokens is a little bit longer.
I can't read that fast anyways, right? So,
I like to skip. Yeah, I like to skip.
Yeah. I mean, most models return above speed reading speed.
But you need that, right? I think. But the idea is that you want to guarantee time to first token is a certain level for user experience reasons. Otherwise, people are like, screw this, not using AI. The decode speed matters a lot too, but not as much as time to first token. And so by having separate prefill decode, you do this, right? But now you've already, and this is all in the same infrastructure, you've already done this. So now it's like, what's the next logical step? These workloads are so different. Decode, you have to load all the parameters in and the KV caches to generate a single token. You batch a couple users together, but very quickly you run out of memory capacity or memory bandwidth because everyone's KV cache is different.
Yeah.
The attention of all the tokens, right? Whereas on prefill, I could even just serve like one or two users at a time, because if they send me a 64,000 context request, that is a lot of flops, right? 64,000 context requests. I'll use Llama 70B because it's simple to do math on. Like 70 billion parameters. That's 140 gigaflops per token. 70 times 64,000. That's many teraflops. You can use the entire GPU for like a second, right? Like potentially, right? Depending on the GPU, to just do the prefill, right? And that's just one forward pass. So I don't necessarily care about loading all the tokens or all the parameters in KV cache in fast. All I care about is all the flops. And so that leads us to sort of like, I had to give this long-winded explanation because it's hard for people to understand what CPX is. I've had a lot of like, even my own clients, like we set like multiple notes, like explaining, and they're like, I still don't understand. I'm like, shit, okay.
Attention is all you need paper. And
you can't expect. I mean, like think about like a networking person. Like they're like, I don't need to know about this. Attention is all you need, right? Like it's like, or think about an investor, right? Like there's all these people. Maybe data center operator. Like they're like, oh, there's two chips. Why should I build my data center for differently? It's like yeah. I got to explain everything, or just like no, you don't have to build differently. But anyways, you get to know
in Stanford, there's 25% of all students, not CS students, of all students read that paper.
Read what paper?
Attention is all you need.
That's low.
the literature majors and like the philosophy guy. I find this amazing. Anyway, sorry.
The Middle East, I can't remember what country it is, has AI education starting at like age 8, and in high school they have to read Attention is all you need.
Wow.
Someone told me that their kid had to read "Attention is all you need." Which is, I don't know. Look, top-down mandates for education, maybe they work, maybe they don't. Maybe people like homeschooling their kids. I don't know. I went to public school, but back to your readers.
Yeah. Just on the topic of hardware cycles, I wanted to maybe...
Sorry, I didn't actually explain what CPX is. So CPX is a very compute optimized chip, whereas for prefill and then decode is just to statistically say it is like the rest is the normal chips with HBM. HBM is more than half the cost of the GPU. If you strip that out, you end up having a much cheaper chip passed on to the customer. So or if NVIDIA takes the same margin, then the cost of this prefill chip is much, much lower, and now the whole process is way cheaper and more efficient. Now long context can be adopted. All right.
Yeah. So I love that we're actually going into all this detail, because I had a more 10,000-foot view question for you, which is I haven't been following the semi market as closely as you have. I probably started with the A100, and I remember helping Noam at Character, this is summer of June 2023, chase down GPUs. And the only thing that mattered at that time was delivery date, because there was a huge capacity crunch. And then to see that over the last 2 years evolve, where, let's say 6 to 12 months ago, people were doing these RFPs to 20 neoclouds, right? And the only thing that mattered to some degree was price.
Wait, people actually do RFPs for GPUs?
Yes.
So just to be clear, my opinion on how you buy GPUs is that it's like buying cocaine or any other drug. This is described to me, not me. I don't buy cocaine.
Yeah. Great.
So someone tells me this. I'm like, holy shit, it's right. You call up a couple people, you text a couple people, you ask, how much you got? What's the price? It's like,
exactly.
This is fucking buying drugs. Sorry.
No, I mean,
to this day, it's the same way. You just send we have Slack connects with 30 neoclouds, and
there you go.
As well as some of the major ones, and we just send them a message hey, customer wants this much. This is what they're looking for, and then they send quotes. And then
I know this guy.
I know a guy. Well, so I think that's actually a very accurate description, and I've sent countless Portcos your Cluster Max original posts, because I thought it did a really good job breaking them down. But maybe one question to end on for me is just, what era are we in now with Blackwell's coming online? Are we sort of back to the summer 2023 era, and that's kind of the cycle that we've just entered, or what's sort of your view on where we are?
So that's a very good question.
For one of your Portcos, we were after their difficulties with Amazon, we were okay, let's actually get you GPUs. The original deals we got you were gone, but here's some other deals, right? It turned out that multiple major neoclouds had sold out of Hopper capacity, and their Blackwell capacity comes online in a few months. So it's a bit of a challenge, right? In that,
due to inference,
inference demand has been skyrocketing this year, right?
Reasoning models. Yeah.
These reasoning models, the revenue, it's been skyrocketing this year, and then also there's a bit of the Blackwell comes online, but it's hard to deploy, so it takes a little there's a learning curve to deploying it. So whereas you got down to you buy the Hopper, you install the data center, it's running within a month or two, right? For Blackwell, it was it's a longer time frame because of reliability challenges. It's a new GPU. I mean, it's just learning pain, right? Learning growing pains. So there was this gap of how many GPUs are coming onto the market right as revenue starting to inflect, and so a lot of capacity got sucked up, right? And actually, prices for Hopper bottomed 3 or 4 months ago, or 5 or 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And actually, they've crept up a little bit now. They're still not so. I don't think we're quite 2023, 2024 era of GPUs are tight, but certainly if you want just a few GPUs, it's easy. But if you want a lot, it's hard. Yeah. You can't get capacity that instantly.
Yeah. Wow. What a time.
So we wrap on that. Dylan, this was another instant classic. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's 2 hours, bro. What the hell?
Thank you.
We couldn't stop. Thanks so much. This is great.
Thank you so much for having me.